Hello and welcome to Raider HQ After Dark. I'm your host Raider, and this video is the second video in the MST/PTSD videos for stressor development. So, in this video, what we're going to be talking about is how stressors are uniquely reviewed for both the stressor qualified under MST and the stressor qualified under personal trauma. Now, before I get too far into this video, the one thing I do want to say is that this is going to be a general overview. I would be here for 5 hours if I went through every single manual reference for this. So, this is going to be just a general overview in order to get you familiarized with how the process from an overt kind of way works uniquely to the MST and the personal trauma stressors and how they're reviewed. Now, I would also like to state that MST coordinators, to which I am not one, have their own personal SOPs, their own personal way to review these. So even though I'm providing you with the information, those individuals will be reviewing your particular evidence, and they will be making the determinations based upon additional standard operating procedures and memorandums of understanding that are unique to the facilities that process the MST claims. Okay. So I just want to put out a heavy disclaimer here that I could not get some of this right because I don't have all of the information. So that's why I'm going to be rather general with it. Okay. So let me go ahead and let's get started. And I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to blow it up to where it's big. Now, the first thing I want to kind of talk about here is evidence review. So for the individual stressors. So there's going to be two different types of evidence that is reviewed for the stressor. What I would consider objective information, which has to do with documented evidence of the occurrence of personal trauma, and then subjective evidence that has to do with using behavioral markers in order to satisfy, evidence of an in-service event. So let's get into it. Now, this manual reference right here, 841B2A, talks about the sufficient evidence to document the occurrence of a personal trauma stressor. Now, this could be military sexual trauma, or this could be actual personal trauma, like you were beat up or something like that. Now, this is the objective evidence situation. So, like you have hospital records, police reports, things like that. Now, if you don't have this stuff, it's okay. There's other ways we can use the subjective review. But when the MST coordinators and the reviewers for the personal trauma stressors are, when they're reviewing this, they want to go to the objective evidence first. So if you have said objective evidence, you will want to lead with this. Objective evidence is the easiest way. I'm not going to say that one's better than the other because you know what? Sometimes we only have what we have. But if you have objective evidence, like original copies or originals or copies of reports of complaints regarding MST from, the Department of Defense, things like that, in-service records showing complaints of treatments related to the personal trauma events, clinical records, mental health records, ER records, sexual and non-sexual. So if you were beat up in the service, the fact that you have the injuries around that time. Now, I'm going to tell you that I understand that even applying for this is a heavy burden that I can't even imagine. Okay? So the only thing I ask you to do is do your best. Okay? So do your best whenever like if you have this evidence, make copies of it, send the copies with your claim. Do your best. because the individuals that will be reviewing this, you know, they are human beings. So, they will treat it with respect. It will not be, in all my years working for the VBA, I've never seen anybody directly utilize this kind of information in an unprofessional way. I have one time seen somebody ask questions. This was before they transferred MST related claims to specialty sites and to qualified individuals that have to go through specialized, like, I would consider it empathy training. And I saw one time where it was bad, but after that, everything changed. So in the current environment, things have changed. Staff are trained better. Staff are seen to try to find evidence to support it, right? They understand that, like what it can go, what it can personally be like to not want to report these things. So if you did report it, good on you. And if you have the evidence to support what I would consider the objective review, then this is going to help you. Um, so if you have any of these things, alternative sources of evidence to provide documentation, civilian police reports, rape crisis center records, or other private medical records at the time. I would also consider like lay statements by statements made by individuals who were there. Just keep in mind that if you do have an individual speak on your behalf that they were at, or that they observed or have direct firsthand knowledge of the event in service, be it MST or personal trauma, please make sure that the person that submits their statement, that they also provide, like, let's say a DD 214, for us to verify that they could have had that knowledge, that they were also a service member, or that, if they were a spouse, that you were married to them at the time, just something to show that they would have, that they have credibility to have the opinion that they have, or to cite the evidence that they have. So, also evidence showing PTSD was initially diagnosed in service. This is going to be a lot more rare for individuals, but still, if you have that, then we would grant that. Other evidence in either service records or alternative sources, so like newspaper articles, things like that, that provide sufficient documentation to support a conclusion that the personal traumatic events occurred. So, this is like I said, this is the objective evidence, to where, the rater can point at and go, oh, okay, or the examiner can point at it and go, okay, I can see where the trauma obviously and clearly happened. Um, and then they talk about alternative sources are sufficient to document personal traumatic events for VA compensation purposes. Federal and non-federal entities that show the veteran experienced the event during a period of qualifying service, or provide the place and circumstances of the event. So that could be the Department of Defense that have that, and we'll go into some of the objective documentation that the Department of Defense provides. And guys, I'm just trying to. This is going to be pretty dry, so please just bear with me on this. If the claim is for non-PTSD conditions, sufficient documentation such as that described the above can serve as guidance of the in-service event. So basically what this bullet point is talking about is, for MST, you don't have to have a diagnosis of PTSD in order to get service connected for that traumatic event. You can have another diagnosis, MDD, GAD, dysthymia, like whatever you have diagnosed. Don't be scared if you have a non-PTSD diagnosis, but the actual event was a stressor due to an MST related trauma or personal trauma. When available service records or alternative sources of evidence do not contain sufficient Yeah, documentary evidence to establish the occurrence of the personal traumatic events. Then we're supposed to use 38 CFR 3.304F5, which is the markers. So it says when we don't have objective evidence to substantiate the claimed stressor, the MST or personal trauma stressor, then what's supposed to happen is we're supposed to shift gears after doing a thorough review of your objective evidence. Then we're going to be switching to the marker system, and I will review the marker system later on. But just keep in mind this is the order of operations. So that's why leading with your strongest evidence for objective evidence is more beneficial because that's what they're going to be looking for first. It weighs a lot more heavily uh, in terms of just knee jerk. The VSR can just review it and go, oh, okay, I can see that. And then they get you the exam. And then post exam, the rater can go, okay, stressor, yeah, okay, clearly verified in the DoD records. Fair enough. If not, it's not a lost cause. There's an entire process for reviewing subjective behavioral markers in combination with clinical review by the psychiatrist or psychologist. Uh, so, uh, yeah, these provisions related to clinical interpretations of behavioral changes or markers should only be applied and when the objective evidence isn't sufficient to satisfy the stressor is basically what they're saying, or you didn't have a diagnosis of PTSD in service. Um, so And then we have an important section down here. The development activity must work closely with the rating activity. So this is actually a really good thing because oftentimes VSRs do not have adequate training to decide whether or not something is a behavioral marker or something isn't a behavioral marker or something is objective evidence or something isn't objective evidence. So what this is saying is before we let the underqualified VSR deem that there's nothing there, that the stressor isn't verified, that they are going to run it by a rater who has more training. So that way you are given the most opportunities to have attentive stewards of your claim. And I like this. This is good because even if like the VSR says, well, I don't think there's enough there, the rater has to be involved to go, no, I think there is. They can overrule the VSR quite easily and then, get you an examination. So just keep in mind here. And then we have a couple of examples. The veteran indicated experiencing a sexual assault and that civilian authorities investigated the assault. A copy of the report from the civilian authorities is provided and it shows the official investigation, an assault involving the veteran and the veteran's domestic partner on April 15th, 1990. Now, this example is very important because the origination of the person on person crime doesn't have to be from service member to service member. Okay, keep that in mind. It can be pretty much anything. Um, it's the fact that the stressor happened, not the originating, I guess, affiliation of the originating person. So they didn't have to be a service member in order for this to be counted as legitimate. I shouldn't have to say that, but I feel like I should. So what happens is the report from the civilian authorities is considered an official documentation establishing the veteran experienced the personal traumatic event during a qualifying period of service. Now, yeah, this could be domestic partner, this could be anything. This is sufficient evidence to support the occurrence of the in service event under 38 CFR 3.304F for PTSD or under 38 CFR 3.303. And that has to do with element one, or well, element two specifically. So the in service stressor. For conditions, whichever is applicable to the claim. Further stressor development is not needed. So that's this is what makes having the objective evidence more If you have the subjective evidence, you want to submit it, because that way we don't have to ask you as many questions. Typically, what happens with an MST claim, and I'm air quoting here in speculation land, because I used to be an MST coordinator before they changed to specialty sites. And what used to happen historically, which might not be the case now, so heavily weighted on this might not be true right now, um, is that we would call the veteran, that the rater would call the veteran and sometimes do the marker review with the veteran. So they would talk about it, talk about different things, and you would be speaking with the rater historically and talking to them about the markers. But I'm so if you had this evidence, you wouldn't need to talk with a rater, and it would be much easier to clear the pathway for you to get granted for the MST or personal trauma related stressor. Now, in example two, in a lay statement provided in support of the claim, the veteran's mother indicates that she remembers the veteran informing her of the experience of sexual harassment over the phone during the period of active duty. So, this would be a lay statement by the mother on behalf of the service member's claim for MST, for sexual harassment. And it says the statement from the veteran's mother is not sufficient on its own to serve as credible supporting evidence that the claimed in service stressor occurred as required, yada, yada, yada. Sufficient documentation of an in service event for the purpose of determining under general purposes for non PTSD. However, if the claim is for PTSD, the statement should be used to support the veteran's claim under the provisions of 38 CFR 3.304 F5, along with clinical interpretation of behaviors. So, what they're talking about here is they're talking about the fact that the mother's statement cannot count as an objective, right, document. It doesn't count as an objective document to prove the truth of the matter. However, what it can serve as is it can be one of the behavioral markers. Her reaching out to the mother, and I want to say it's a her. Yeah, she. The mother. Okay, I made a generalization there. So the service member reached out to the mother. So the the act of reaching out to the mother will actually be counted under the behavioral marker section for the subjective portion of the stressor assessment. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on to that right now. So actually, hold on. Before we do that, I do want to, like, these are some of the objective documentations by the DoD. So if you're looking through your records, these are the names of the offices that you would want to make sure that if you have any records from them, that you focus on searching for these records. You can do that through AI. You know, if you have, I've actually heard, I watched this, but there's some AI programs out there that can actually go through. If you have a copy of your C file, they can actually go through and search for stuff like that. That might be a good use of AI in this, is to actually search for, keywords or key organizations or things like that. So that's why I wanted to show you 841B3A, is because you are kind of looking for these documents. You are also potentially looking for, in case of MST events, restricted reporting and unrestricted reporting. So, restricted reporting, geez, my clicker thing, allows a service member to confidentially file a formal report. So, this is a confidential report. So, this would be in your, I want to say, in your OMPF files, in your OMPF records. So it's clearly restricted from your chain of command. Um, so that way they wouldn't see it. It would have to be almost explicitly requested. Now, if you had a restricted report and you can't find it in your records, then with your claim, you might need to tell the VA that you filed or had restricted reporting for the MST claim. Now, the reason why you'll want to do that is because they'll probably have to go to the actual the place that you were stationed and get those records from the organization, from the DoD, because those restricted reports would be within the facility and they wouldn't be within your records. So please keep that in mind. And then we have an unrestricted report, which allows service members to file a formal report and receive medical care and supportive services with notification to command, which means this record is probably might be with your records in your OMPF records, your official military personnel file. But these are the forms right here. So once again, the victim reporting preference statement. If we can find this form, that's very probative. That's objective evidence showing that you had, a person-on-person stressor. The following an MST event involving intimate partner sexual abuse. This is the form for this, which is going to be 2967. Also looking, searching through any records that you can, or if you know that you filled out one of the two of these forms, please let the VA know that, whichever route you went to. Sorry, my dog's being loud. And then we also have this form right here, which is for the forensics reports. Obviously, report whatever you feel comfortable reporting, but these three forms right here, the 2910, the 2967, and the 2911, these forms are objective forms to show that that's evidence of evidence that, the DoD wouldn't have you fill these out unless there was something there, right? So even if we can't get the full report, we know that something happened. So that would prove your in-service stressor. And then we have an explanation about here. The DoD may not provide the VA with a copy of the 2911 itself, but the DoD may provide treatment records. So even if they just give us the treatment records, that's enough to qualify that the stressor exists, okay? Also, the DoD may have used other forms prior to the issuance of these forms. So please just keep in mind of that. It's like the 2910 form was preceded by the NAVPERS 1752-1. If you can find anything in your records to support the event officially was notated, annotated, whatever, lead with that. And then let me see here. So 3C. So for service members who experience sexual assault harassment during service, DoD does not offer the MST restriction or unrestricted reports. So keep this in mind. Obviously, the staff members who are reviewing for it, if you say that it's sexual harassment in nature, then the staff may not look for these documents up here. Because there wasn't a restricted, or there wouldn't be a restricted or unrestricted report for sexual harassment itself. Sexual assault is different. So it talks about how to bypass that. Like where would we find evidence of the sexual harassment? So, and that would be with the SHARP program. I know that in my unit, there was somebody had to use the SHARP program because there was some inappropriate behaviors, some unwanted contact harassment that I had to testify to. Not that I was involved in it, but just because I observed it and I ended up coming forward to my chain of command. So, and I had to do a formal statement for that. And then the table below describes the complaint and reporting options provided to service members. So this right here is just basically for the VSR to run back through to see, hey, look, was there a formal complaint? This is what would, this is how it would turn out. To help the VSR understand where the information might be, how the military might have responded at that time. Now, if you are also an individual who comes from an ancillary branch of service, so not one of the main services, because the VA also gives disability to I don't even remember how to say it, like NOAA, the National Oceanic Observatory. Like there's a couple of and I'm gonna actually do a video on this, so I'll put a pin in this right now. But if you are if you are a service member in a qualifying non-military organization that also receives VA benefits, um, they might have a different form of complaint system. So, if that's the case for you, you might need to help the VA along in understanding how your system works. I'm sure that there are special SOPs for that, but I just want to make mention of that. And I will talk about the other agencies in a different video. So, um, and then we just go on here and there's more tables for the VSRs to follow. And the video is already at 26 minutes. So I'm going to switch and transition to um, something else here. So what we're looking at here is these are, I wanted to pull this up because this is um, objective information, but these are a list of more defined potential acceptable alternative sources of evidence. So the Rape Crisis Center or domestic abuse, counseling facility and or health clinic, family members or roommates. Now, obviously with family members or roommates, this is going to be evidence that is like a lay statement or a buddy statement. Once again, I can't stress this enough. They have to provide some like evidence that they were at the same location as you. I don't know if it's a lease or, some kind of something that says, "Hey, look, I was at the same place at the same time and I could have noticed that." Um, just to help their buddy statement have more credibility. Obviously, a faculty member will fall under the same criteria that they have to show that they worked at the same place. Civilian police reports, that's pretty on its face objective information. Medical reports, obviously objective information. The chaplain and or clergy, even though they're more of an official organization, hate this thing. Um, they will also fall under the lay or buddy statement type official report. Fellow service members, same thing. They'll need to show, that they were in the same location at the same time. And then personal diaries and or journals, obviously that's going to be your personal statement. So you don't have to really, go out of your way to prove anything other than that the journals were done at that time. And how you do that is just, you know, obviously they'll be dated, um, things like that. Now, here's when we get into the subjective section. So, if service records contain no sufficient documentary evidence that personal trauma occurred, okay, which is the standard. Okay, this is the rule for the most part. Like, just because of the nature of the person on person crime, there is oftentimes no official documentation. Do not let that dissuade you. Okay, please don't, because there are people eager to look through your evidence to try to find any kind of correlating factors that could grant your that could concede your stressor, either be it for personal trauma and or MST. So, and alternative sources do not provide credible supporting evidence that trauma evidence of behavioral changes around that time of and after the events may constitute a marker for a personal trauma event. So, um, the term marker means an indicator of the effect or consequences of the personal trauma on the veteran. A marker could be one or more behavioral events or a pattern of changed behavior. So, what we're looking at here, and these are some of the examples of markers for personal trauma, and this has to do with 841E1D. Now, a marker basically means like something really horrible and bad happened to you, and you typically couldn't report it. So the thing is, you want to try to get away from it. So you would start to behave differently, even subconsciously. There, it doesn't have to be a big thing like you went AWOL, though that can count sometimes. If the time period corresponds with what happened, then going AWOL can be a thing, as evidenced by it's one of the first things here. Increased use or abuse of leave without apparent reasons, such as family obligations or illnesses. It doesn't have to have a neon light on it saying that, this is due to my abuse. This is what the rater is going to be using to interpret whether or not, some incidents happened. Episodes of depression, panic attacks, hospitalizations, medical visits, or counseling sessions without specific diagnosis and or ailment, you know, use of or increased interest in pregnancy tests. This is very subjective information, guys. So it doesn't have to be like a lot of the cases in which we get service connection for is they're like, look, you didn't prove it enough to me. Well, the good news is this isn't going to be up to an examiner to prove. This is going to be up to a specially trained rater who is going to be looking for changes in your behavior, such as like sudden requests to change MOSs or duty stations or something. You know, if you behave differently, that's going to come up. And you remember the example from earlier where the mother did a personal statement and said that you know something to the effect of that the person on person crime happened. It doesn't even have to be that specific. It could just be like my daughter started calling or my son started calling home more often after this time, saying that they hated the military, they didn't want to be there anymore. That can be a marker. Increase or decrease in the use of prescription medications, increase or use of alcohol or drug abuse, increase disregard for military or civilian authority. So if you started getting Article 15s after this, after the reported, the time period of the stressor, that's a thing. It doesn't have to be related to the stressor at all, to the person on person crime or the personal trauma. It can just be like you started just acting out and you started getting in more trouble. Obsessive behavior such as overeating or undereating, explained economic or social behavioral changes. And this is very subjective. This could be brought by other people. But the way that this works is it has to show a trend. So if you had, like, let's say you had behavioral markers before the event occurred, and you had the same similar behavioral markers afterwards, like let's say before the person on person trauma happened, you got Article 15 or 2 or some 41. I forget the actual counseling statement, but let's say you got some counseling statements too. Well, that wouldn't be a marker for the actual stressor event because they happened beforehand. What we're looking for is unique changes that happened or more drastic changes. So, like, let's say you got a counseling statement before the traumatic event, and then you started getting Article 15s and a lot of counselings afterwards. That would be evidence, right? That there was a change. So, if you have equal parts of a marker on before the stressor happened and equal parts of the marker after the stressor happened, then that behavioral marker isn't sufficient to grant or to concede the stressor. You'd have to show like if you like after the person on person crime, your relationship, you broke up with your significant other, that would be a thing, like so there's quite a few of these. If these are not, and it says but not limited to, these are just examples for the VSR and the rater to have, so that way they can kind of wrap their head around how what range of topics that they can pull from, and not specifically that these are exclusively everything. And we're at 34 minutes. So, and I'm going to have to probably cut this one shorter than I wanted to. The veteran indicated an in-service personal traumatic event being sexually harassed by a superior. Service personnel records show that during this time frame, the veteran had minimally sufficient or average performance reviews. So even performance reviews by your superiors, where your performance changes, can count. After a routine transfer to a new duty station, the veteran began to receive commendations. So your performance improved after leaving the bad situation. That makes sense. That's all that's needed to show to concede a marker in your favor. Now, there's a form that lists the markers, and I forget where it is, but we don't have access to it. So you don't have access to it, to where you can look it up. So unfortunately, you've got to go off of this thing. But the behavioral markers require you to have to look up your personnel file. So if you have access to it, look it up, review it, see if there's changes beforehand with the date of the incident. You're looking for changes that happened after the incident or leading up to it or whatever. And then what you also might have to do is you might have to go to a VSO, because the FOIA requests might not be working because of the government shutdown at this time. Uh, Public contact at the ROs are currently not working. So, because they're not public facing and because the government shut down. So, getting these records might be challenging. But let's say that you were denied for MST. I would go, and I'm switching a huge gear here, but let's say you were denied for MST. I would look to see the rationale because they have to do a long form narrative on it, and just review your evidence. And I know that I'm asking a lot because you're going to be emotional, beyond all recognition, because and how could you not be? But what you need to do if you were denied for MST is you need to look and see, what did they give me credit for? And then go through your records once you get them and you get access to them. Look for things that they missed. Look for behavioral markers. Look for the objective evidence. If they missed that, if they missed the forms, the required forms, then go look for that information. But if you had additional markers that weren't taken into consideration, that might be a reason to do either a higher level review or a supplemental claim, depending on how the evidence was, reviewed in your original claim. Now, for right now, that is about all I want to kind of cover because we're almost at the 40-minute mark. But I just want to summarize here. And I've probably not done a very good job of going over this video, but it's, like I said, it's challenging. So if you have objective evidence, police reports, any kind of hard documented information, you want to lead with that. If you don't, then you want to use the marker system. Okay. You want to actually, um, gather your records. Don't just, and this is just some advice. I wouldn't just submit and let the VA, like say good luck everyone and let the VA sort out the markers. I might point out the markers if I were you, because you can start going, oh man, yeah, that didn't happen before the event. I only started doing that afterwards, and point those out to them because it can only help, like their marker review, because they've got to look through all of your personnel file in order to look at some of these. And sometimes they skim. We're currently in a government shutdown, so I'm not going to say that that will detract from their attention span, but it might. So the more help that you can do to front load the marker review, the better. I'm going to put each one of these in the chat, guys. So if you want me to do a follow-up on this, I can do marker review maybe during a live stream event, like the next live stream I have, not this Saturday, but the next Saturday. And maybe we can talk about it if that's what you guys want. Anyway, that's about all I got for you today. And this was a one-time take. So, and I'm just going to leave in all the flubs and blubs and all that kind of stuff. And if I made a mistake in here, what I'll do is I will pin a comment and fix the mistake. But for the most part, I try to be as general as possible. Anyway, that's about all I got for today. Raider out.